In a sweaty courtroom, an arrogant white cop smirks, ready to testify against a black woman he's sure he's nailed. He mocks her to his buddies, expecting an easy win until she walks in, robed, and takes the judge's seat. His swagger crumbles as she turns the trial on him, exposing his flaws. Justice shifts, lessons sting, and the end leaves you wondering who's next. Dive into a gripping tale of pride, power, and a twist that hits hard right now. Officer Darren Holt leaned against the precinct locker room wall, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting harsh shadows on the chipped tile floor. At 38, he carried a stocky frame, his uniform crisp, badge glinting with a dull pride 16 years on. Mobile's force had hardened him into a fixture. His boots scuffed the ground as he adjusted his belt, the holster's weight a familiar anchor. He was due in court today, drug bust, clean and simple, or so he thought. He'd caught her with pills in her car, a black woman, mid-40s, too calm for someone guilty. "She's going down, boys," he said, his voice loud, bouncing off the metal lockers, a gravelly drawl thick with confidence. "Think she's slick caught her red-handed with the oxy." His buddies Rick, beefy and red-faced, his laugh a bark, and Tommy, wiry with a buzz cut, eyes sharp-grinned, the sound rough and easy. "Easy win," Rick said, slapping his thigh, his meaty hand leaving a red mark. "You're the man, Holt," Darren smirked, replaying the bust in his head humid night. Her car pulled over on Dauphin Street, headlights slicing through the dark, humidity clinging to his skin. She'd sat there, hands steady on the wheel, saying, "You'll see." Her voice low and even as he cuffed her, his smirk wide. He tossed the pill bottle. OxyContin, no label. He'd assumed onto his dash, the plastic rattling, radio crackling with Tommy's voice. "Got her?" "Yeah," Darren had replied, "another one for the books, wrap it up quick." Why was he so sure? Years of busts, nods from the chief, a town that took his word as gospel, especially with black suspects. Always the same story in his eyes. Guilty until proven otherwise, and even then, he didn't buy it. He'd never lost a case like this. Never had to. His gut was enough, and Mobile backed him. Judges, juries, the works. A rookie, Jake, lingered by his locker, quieter than the rest, his blonde hair still damp from a shower, his green eyes flicking up. "You sure she's guilty?" he asked, voice low, zipping his duffel with a soft rasp. Darren's grin sharpened, teeth flashing. "I don't miss, kid. She's cooked, judge'll see it my way, always do." Jake shrugged, uneasy, his fingers pausing on the zipper. But he said nothing more, slinging the bag over his shoulder and stepping back. Darren clapped Rick's back, his palm heavy. "Court's in an hour, watch me bury her. Gonna be a slaughter," Tommy chuckled, pulling on his cap. "Make it quick, we got beers after." Across town, Adrienne Wells stood in her kitchen, the morning sun slanting through lace curtains onto the hardwood floor, casting delicate patterns over her bare feet. At 46, she carried elegance in her tall, slender frame, her braids swept into a neat bun, her skin a warm brown glowing in the light. Her judicial robe hung folded over a chair, black as midnight, its weight a quiet promise she'd earned. She sipped coffee from a chipped mug, the bitterness grounding her, as she reviewed the case file. State v. Ellis, drug possession, Officer Darren Holt's report staring back. Sloppy work glared from the pages, dashcam off. Chain of custody vague, assumptions scrawled in hasty pen. She'd been Mobile's newest judge for 3 months, her first major case today, and this one hit close, too close. She flipped to the arrest photo herself, staring back, her face calm, even in cuffs, eyes steady under the flash. That night, Holt's flashlight had blinded her through her car window, his voice sharp. "Out of the car now." But she'd complied, stepping onto the asphalt, silent as he rummaged through her glove box, tossing her purse onto the hood, finding the bottle hers, yes, but legal. A prescription for chronic pain he'd ignored in his rush. "You're done," he'd sneered, cuffing her wrists tight, the metal biting. She'd said, "You'll see," her voice steady, knowing this moment would circle back. A former public defender. She'd faced his type cops, who saw her skin and wrote the story before the facts. Their smirks a wall she'd learned to dismantle. Now, she'd sit above him, gavel in hand. Her sister, Tanya, called as Adrienne, stacked her files, her voice crackling through the phone. "You're judging that cop? The one who—" "Yes," Adrienne cut in, soft but firm, setting her mug down with a faint clink. "Be careful," Tanya said, worry threading her words, her breath quick. "He's got a rep rough, cocky, whole precincts behind him." Adrienne smiled, faint, tracing the file's edge. "Justice is careful. It has to be." She hung up, slipped her credentials into her briefcase, gold seal gleaming under the kitchen light, and drove to the courthouse, the humid air pressing through her rolled-down window, her mind sharp as she navigated Mobile's oak-lined streets, the weight of the day settling in. Outside the courtroom, Darren lounged with Rick and Tommy, his boots propped on a wooden bench, coffee cup steaming in his hand, the hall buzzing with life lawyers in wrinkled suits, clerks with clipboards, a janitor pushing a mop. He spotted her, plain gray slacks, white blouse, briefcase swinging, crossing the lobby toward the side door. "There she is," he said, loud enough to turn heads, his voice carrying over the chatter. "Ready to lose, sweetheart?" Rick chuckled, a deep rumble, clapping Darren's shoulder. Tommy elbowed him, grinning wide. "Gonna cry to the judge, huh?" "Oh, please, I'm innocent," Darren called, sipping his coffee, the burn on his tongue matching the smug heat in his chest. She kept walking, silent, her stride even, disappearing through the door marked chambers only. A few lawyers glanced over, eyebrows raised, but Darren didn't care. "Toast," he muttered, tossing the cup into a trash can with a hollow thud, the lid clattering. Jake trailed behind, frowning, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "That her?" he asked, voice low. "Yeah," Darren said, stretching his arms. "Watch her squirm, she's got nothing." The courtroom smelled of wax and sweat, the air thick with humidity as ceiling fans whirred overhead, sluggish against Mobile's relentless heat. Darren leaned against the witness stand, uniform crisp, despite the dampness, under his arms. Badge catching the light, his smirk lingering like a habit he couldn't shake. Rick and Tommy sat in the back row, arms crossed, waiting for the show, Rick's meaty hands tapping his knee. Tommy's cap pulled low. Jake sat beside them, quieter, his notepad out, pen poised. Darren flexed his hands, cracking his knuckles. Years of testifying, judges eating from his palm. This'd be quick. He'd walk in, tell the story, walk out a winner same as always. The bailiff's voice boomed through the room. "All rise." Darren straightened, chest puffed out, time to shine. Time to bury her. The door behind the bench creaked open, slow and heavy, and she walked in, robe black as night, gavel in hand, her braids tucked under a cap, her posture commanding. Judge Adrian Wells, his smirk vanished, jaw locking tight, a cold jolt spiking his spine like ice water. The room tilted. Her eyes met his, steady, unblinking. A quiet storm brewing behind them, dark and deep. Rick's grin faded to a slack line. Tommy shifted, a cough breaking the sudden hush rough, awkward. "No way," Darren thought, throat dry, his pulse thudding loud in his ears, drowning the fans. The woman he'd mocked sweetheart, toast now, sat above him, gavel gleaming like a blade in her hand, her presence filling the space. She tapped it once sharp, final, the sound slicing through the humid air like a gunshot. "Be seated," she said, her voice calm, but ironclad, carrying to the back row with an effortless weight. The crowd settled, locals in faded shirts, lawyers with briefcases, a reporter from the mobile register scribbling furiously, chairs creaking under the press of bodies, the wood groaning. Darren sank to the witness chair, hands clammy, his uniform suddenly tight, the collar chafing his neck. She adjusted her glasses, wire frames glinting, and opened her file with a faint rustle. "Officer, your testimony begin," she said, her tone cutting, precise. No hint of the hall's taunts, no flicker of recognition, just business, cold and clear. He swallowed, heard his script unraveling in his head, words tangling like wet rope. He cleared his throat, voice rough, gravel scraping. Right. Pulled her over, Dauphin Street, late humid as hell. Saw her toss something, searched the car, found pills oxy, no label. Bagged it, cuffed her, done deal. His words stumbled, clipped. Not the smooth roll he'd practiced in the precinct mirror, his usual swagger faltering. Adrienne's pen scratched slow, deliberate, the sound grating on his nerves. Dashcam footage? She asked, eyes lifting from the page, pinning him like a specimen under glass. Darren blinked, his mouth dry as dust. Wasn't on battery died, he said, a lie he'd used before. Chief chewed him out for skipping it, but it had never mattered. Not till now. Her brow arched, faint, a flicker of skepticism. Chain of custody for the evidence? His stomach twisted, a knot tightening. Logged it at the station standard, he muttered, hands fidgeting, fingers tapping the stand, his badge dull now under the courtroom's harsh light. She leaned forward, voice level, unyielding. Where's the log? Prosecution submitted no record. Darren's mouth opened, closed, sweat beaded on his neck, trickling down his spine. Must have, misplaced it, he said, voice low, his eyes darting to Rick. His buddy's head was down, avoiding him. Tommy stared at the floor. Jake's pen moved steady, scribbling every stumble. The defense attorney, Carter, a wiry guy with graying hair. Adrienne's old public defender pal stood, his loafers scuffing the floor. Officer, your report says erratic driving. Witnesses to back that up? Darren's jaw tightened, heat rising. Didn't need 'em, saw it myself, he snapped, his voice louder than he meant, echoing faintly. Carter smirked, thin and sharp. No footage, no log, no witnesses, just your word? Darren's temper flared hot, quick, a spark catching. I know what I saw. She's guilty, he barked, voice rising, his fist thumping the stand, the wood vibrating. Adrienne's gavel cracked once, sharp, a whip snapping the air. Order, she said, her voice a blade, her gaze piercing through him, dark and unrelenting. Answer the question or I'll hold you in contempt. His chest heaved. He'd never been pressed like this. Not in Mobile. Not by anyone. Not by a judge who knew his game. No witnesses, he ground out, voice low, his fists clenching under the stand, nails digging into his palms. Carter paced, slow, deliberate. Those pills unlabeled, you said. Checked for a prescription? Darren froze. He hadn't. Didn't think to. Didn't need to street stuff, he snapped, but doubt crept in, cold and slick, his gut sinking. Carter slid a paper across to Adrienne. Her prescription, legal, filed days before the bust. A doctor's signature clear as day. Darren's ears rang, a high-pitched whine drowning the room's hum. Adrienne flipped it, read silently, her glasses catching the light, then looked up, her eyes locking his steady, deep seeing through every layer of his bluster. Evidence, inadmissible procedural lapse, she said, her voice even, measured, but heavy as stone. No chain of custody. No corroboration stricken. The crowd buzzed, whispers swelling. A local in a plaid shirt muttering, he's done, his voice carrying. Rick's arms dropped. Tommy rubbed his neck, his cap slipping. Jake's pen paused, his head tilting, eyes wide with something like awe. Darren's throat burned, his face flushing red. This is a setup, he barked, half standing, chair scraping loud against the floor, his hands gripping the stand. Adrienne's gavel hit twice, hard, the bangs overlapping, silencing the room. Sit or it's contempt, she said, calm but steel, her presence filling the space, her robe a wall of authority. He sank back, breath short, his vision blurring at the edges, control slipping like sand through his fingers, his chest tight. Carter pressed on, hours stretched, questions piling like bricks. Time of arrest exact? Search warrant filed? Why no backup called? Darren's answers frayed, Stammers, gaps, excuses thinning sweat soaking his collar. His tie a noose now. The crowd shifted restless, riveted every flinch noted, every stumble a crack in his armor. Adrian ruled again, half his testimony struck, holes gaping wide, her pen slashing lines through the prosecution's case. Rick's shoulders slumped. Tommy's cap hid his eyes. Jake scribbled, his notepad filling, his breath quickening. Darren's hands shook. He'd walked in a king. Chest puffed, now a fool, her gaze stripping him bare, her silence louder than his shouts. The reporter's pen raced. The locals leaned forward. Mobile watched, waiting. The courtroom clock ticked past 3 when Adrian's voice cut through the hum, steady and final. Case dismissed, evidence insufficient. Her gavel tapped quiet, deliberate. The sound a period on Darren's ruin, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. She leaned forward, eyes locking his, dark and unflinching. "Justice isn't assumption, officer," she said, her voice soft but heavy, sinking into him like damp heat. "It's proof, nothing less." No lecture, just truth. Subtle, sharp. A lesson carved in the air between them. The crowd exhaled murmurs, rippling. A lawyer in a cheap suit nodding. The reporter bolting for the door, her heels clicking fast. Darren stood, legs leaden, his uniform wrinkled, badge tarnished by sweat, his breath ragged. Adrian rose, robe swaying, and exited to her chambers, her step steady, briefcase swinging lightly in her hand, her shadow long on the floor. Darren stumbled to the hall empty now, the echo of Rick and Tommy's boots already gone, their laughs dead in the air. His phone buzzed, Chief's voice, curt through the static. "Review boards, next get your story straight." He leaned against the wall, the plaster cool against his back, breath heaving, replaying her words, "Justice isn't assumption." Why'd it sting so deep? Years of swagger, assuming guilt her skin, her calm wrong every damn time. He saw her car that night, still, composed, then her on the bench, commanding, her gavel a quiet hammer. Respect, not his bluster, held power, he felt it now, raw and real. His fists clenched, anger flared, hot and familiar, then flickered, doubt creeping in, small but persistent, a crack in his shell. Humiliation burned, but something shifted, unsettled, uncertain. Outside, Adrienne drove home through Mobile's oak-lined streets, the city's dusk casting long shadows over the asphalt, the air heavy with salt and heat. Her phone rang, Tanya's voice, tense. "You okay after that?" "Fine," Adrian said, voice soft, her grip steady on the wheel. "He's not." Tanya hesitated. "Heard he's pissed, watch yourself." Adrian pulled into her driveway, a note waiting on her porch unsigned, scrawled in black ink. "Watch him, he's trouble." She set it on her kitchen table, pen pausing over her next case file. Another cop, another bust, another shadow looming. Her sister's warning echoed, but her hands stayed steady. She'd faced worse, would again, her calm a shield forged over years. The radio hummed through the wall reform talk stirring Mobile, voices rising. She glanced at the note. Whose trouble? His or hers? Darren drove to his trailer, dusk deepening. The chief's call looping in his head review board. His job teetering on the edge. He parked, gravel crunching under his tires, and stumbled inside, the screen door slamming shut. He stared in the bathroom mirror-ready face, hard eyes, stubble dark against his skin. Anger simmered her fault, a setup, a humiliation he'd make her pay for. But her voice cut through proof, not assumption cool and clear, slicing his excuses apart. He tossed his badge on the kitchen table. It clinked, dull, rolling to a stop. Resign, fight. The board loomed his word against hers now, a judge's, not a cop's. His power stripped bare. His phone buzzed. Rick. "You good, man?" He didn't reply, the silence thick. His breath fogging the mirror. Change or double down? The night pressed in, dark and unanswered, crickets shrieking outside. Adrian sat at her desk, lamplight soft on her face. File open new case, new shadows stretching across the pages. The courthouse stood quiet downtown, its echo lingering. Holt's lesson etched in the air, her burden growing heavier. A city watching, waiting. She wrote a note. Check precinct logs. Her pen steady, then paused. The threat's scrawl flickering in her mind. What next for him, for her, for Mobile? Thank you all for watching this video. Please comment and let me know what you think about this story. Please like and subscribe to watch more great content on my channel.